Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy President's Day as well. And welcome to our wonderful friend, Emily, sitting in for Sagar today and tomorrow.
I was really hoping that I could just say I was Sagar. We didn't have to acknowledge it. I could just go ramble about weed and UFOs, and it would just be like he was here.
Yeah. Well, we are going to talk about UFOs. We also, it is a jam-packed show, to be honest with you. So we have breaking news, President Biden on this President's Day making a trip to Ukraine in active war zone in Kyiv. So we'll bring you all of those details. We also have updates on UFOs. We've got updates on Ohio. Jimmy Carter, news came out that he is entering hospice care. So in his final days, we'll talk a little bit about that. Looks like Marianne Williamson is going to run for president. We also have a little Trump DeSantis meatball Ron update for the people out there. Don Lemon potentially out at CNN. He is benched this morning, I guess, from his morning show after making some pretty eyebrow-raising comments about when women are in their quote-unquote prime.
It's also why Sagar's not here. He's benched. He did the same thing as Don.
That's right. The truth comes out about Sagar. And we have wonderful journalist Rich McHugh, who has been on the ground in East Palestine, Ohio. Trump actually is making a trip there this week. So all of those details, and Emily is taking a look at censorship of Roald Dahl books. I'm taking a look at some very unsettling conversations with ChatGPT now that it is in Microsoft Bing. But let's go ahead and start with the big breaking news this morning. So as I said, let's go ahead and put these images up on the screen, guys. President Biden making a surprise trip to Kyiv. You see him there shaking hands with the First Lady and also with Zelensky himself. Now, we knew that he was going to be in Warsaw, Poland on Tuesday. There'd been a lot of rumors over whether or not he might make the trip to Ukraine, but they had kept this all a secret. In fact, his schedule said that on Monday he was still in D.C. Turns out he left, I believe, Saturday night to make this journey. You have to fly into Poland, then you take like a 7-hour train into what is, again, an active war zone here. That second video that we showed, actually, there were air raid sirens going off in the background as they're walking around in central Kyiv there. So, you know, this comes, Emily, as, of course, the war is almost to the 1-year anniversary of when Russia invaded Ukraine. It also comes at a time when, you know, Russia is starting another offensive. Things are dicey. There's a lot of intelligence estimates and RAND Corporation saying we are headed for a stalemate. There's a little bit of wavering from allies, some actually pushing Ukraine now to go to the peace table. And also at a time when Republicans are now in control of the House, so that rock solid blank check support that has been, you know, there every single time Biden has asked or Zelensky has asked, there might be a little bit more dissent now. So clearly this is an effort to say, we're with you, we're standing with you, and he's expected to give a speech in Poland, I believe, on Tuesday at the same time Putin is giving a speech, and I would not be surprised if there was an additional military aid package, some sort of additional weapons that are announced there as well.
Right, and he announced an additional $500 million in military aid, I think, when he was with Zelensky, and I looked, that brings the total to something like north of $20 billion just in military aid. Of course, we're around $50 billion total, but just in military aid alone, 20 billion, 20 plus billion.
Yeah.
When you add that 500 million total, your point about the House is a really good one, because Zelensky came to Washington, D.C., as everybody remembers, in the midst of these conversations about what might be happening with funding from Congress. Well, now it's reality. Now the House Republicans are in, and they control the purse strings, and Biden has to deal with that. Another interesting thing I wonder is, I'm quite sure they didn't talk about Cy Hirsch's piece, but his visit does come on the heels of that.
Yes. Just to remind people, so Cy Hirsch, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, came out with a very detailed report on his Substack about how the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, you know, it always seemed a little bit strange to imagine that Russia blew up their own infrastructure, which had been very beneficial to them and very beneficial to Germany and other European partners there.
Huge moneymaker.
Huge moneymaker for them. And also, you know, there were some signs at the time. Biden had previously said, like, one way or another, we will, what did he say, end or stop or something, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So I was like, oh, really interesting. And this, it's a single source, it's an anonymous source, so take it for what it's worth, but really detailed explanation. And frankly, the motives for the U.S. make a lot more sense than the motives for Russia ever did, because the idea here is basically like, if there was any worrying that the German public in particular would go wobbly, or German politicians would go wobbly over the winter as energy prices went through the roof, well, this would make it so basically they have no exit ramp. Right. Russia has also started to try to repair very expensive repairs that would have to be done to this pipeline, which also raised questions about like, well, if they were the ones that blew it up, why are they now trying to fix it? And multiple assessments came out that were like, quietly, months after, we couldn't actually find any evidence of Russian involvement here. And
it's strange. And it's obviously the Cy Hirsch piece. There was a great actually response to it by Lee Smith in Tablet magazine, who wrote that the most unlikely thing, the reason that piece lacks credibility, is simply because it shows the Biden administration with a stunning amount of competence. If this piece is to be
the best
believed,
pushback you could have,
right? Like, it means, because it was during this like massive international event, the waters were being very closely patrolled. Russia patrols the Nord Stream waters obviously very closely, as anyone could imagine. It's such a huge source of money for them. So the competence that the Biden administration would have to do that, first of all, then to cover it up, secondly, it is sort of defies reason. I still think it's probably the most likely scenario, but Zelensky certainly feels that the Biden administration is competent. That much is clear.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, listen, bottom line, whether Cy Hirsch's piece has all the details precisely correct. If it was Russia, we would have found some evidence. If we found even the slightest little hint of evidence, they would have run with that. New York Times, everybody would have run with that, no doubt about it. And if it wasn't Russia, whether it was technically us or Ukraine or the UK, it was us. I mean, and that is the broader context for this war, is as it has been prosecuted, we have gotten ourselves further and further and further in. So there really is no more plausible deniability that this is basically a Russian war with us and NATO. Things that were previously off the table have continuously been put on the table. We're at tanks now that we're planning to ship. There's a lot of pressure from Zelensky and others. Lindsey Graham out now saying, hey, we should send those fighter jets as well. These are things that were previously unimaginable just a year ago when this war began, and when the Biden administration's position was, we will only send defensive aid. Now, the other piece of context here that we talked about too last week, Emily, is we already had some reports that the U.S. at the very beginning of this war, and UK and NATO, but predominantly the U.S., basically short-circuited peace talks that there were no guarantees that a resolution was going to be achieved, but they were working on the outline of a deal that was actually coming together. We knew previously that Boris Johnson had traveled to Kyiv to basically deliver that message to Zelensky in person. We don't want a peace deal. We want to back you and actually win this war and potentially have regime change in Russia. So we do not want these peace talks. We just got recently, though, an interview that was quite bombshell, of course, barely reported in the press at all, from former Prime Minister of Israel, who was deeply involved in those early peace talks, and really put some color on how, again, at that point, there were concessions that were given on both sides, difficult concessions that were made both by Putin and Zelensky. Now, you could say maybe they weren't going to follow through in terms of Putin's side, but there were concessions that were put on the table. He thought there was a 50-50 chance they could come to a deal, and the U.S. said, we do not want that. We want to continue with this war. So at this point, a year in, what has become very clear is we are a predominant driving force in this war. We have decided that our goal is to actually make Ukraine win, to try to damage Russia. And there's been little to no effort put in to achieve any sort of peace negotiations. And, this is a sign from Biden, again, that they are committed to this course and they're going to continue this course.
That, I think, is the big takeaway here, that the more he aligns himself with the Zelensky approach, which is that there is absolutely no appeasement. That's the word that we hear over and over again. Any concessions necessarily amount to appeasement. So the more that is Biden's position, the more we are just putting money into a money pit, basically, because Putin, the war for Putin, it means a lot to him. He's not just going to back off of the war, and the stakes are high, and he knows the stakes are high for him. So we can continue to pour our money into a war that far away from us. That doesn't mean it's not important, but we can continue to pour our money into it. He's going to continue pouring his money and his people into the war effort at the same time. So if you can't come to the negotiation table, there's just no hope of anything but another sort of stalemate or quagmire, to borrow a word.
There are multiple assessments now, including from the Rand Corporation, which is predominantly funded by the Pentagon, that we are not headed for a Ukrainian victory or a Russian victory. What we're headed towards is a brutal, bloody stalemate, which will kill many more Ukrainian civilians, which will continue to decimate their economy, and which, of course, also has had tremendous global impacts in terms of the price of food, the price of energy, which have been devastating in the developing world in particular, and which includes then the risk of further escalations and an actual hot war directly between Russia and NATO, and the possibility, of course, of nuclear usage by Russia. They are advocating against the Rand Corporation, funded by the Pentagon, that what we need to do is try to push for an end to this war. Now, let me say that there was a report from the Washington Post, for what it's worth, that the Biden administration's idea right now is, okay, let's strengthen Zelensky's hand. Let's allow him to fight back against this Russian offensive in the spring, and let's get him to a strong position to then push for negotiations maybe sometime in this summer. We'll see. Certainly, again, all the logic has been thus far from the U.S. side is if Ukraine is doing poorly, then, okay, we've got to ship them more weapons so we can strengthen their negotiating hand. That's kind of what they're saying right now. If they are doing well and they have Russia on the back foot, then it's, oh, well, they can actually win, so let's supply them again. So all of the logic has led towards escalation. Let's hope with these new assessments that they change course and push for a negotiated settlement, because it looks increasingly clear that is the only way that this thing will ultimately end. He's going to give a speech on Tuesday. We'll make sure to bring you all the breaking developments there and anything else that occurs on this big trip. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.